If you can believe it, growing up in Atlanta, we had a banana tree in our backyard. You can call my parents and ask them if you don't believe it, all right? We had it for years until it finally died in a freeze. And the fact that it grew at all was remarkable because my parents, both of them, can kill silk plants. It's no joke. No joke. And banana trees will, in fact, grow in Atlanta. You can grow them in a pot in your house, but they'll grow outside in Atlanta. It is sufficiently hot and humid. They'll grow, and they grow down here, too. I used to know somebody down in Victoria that had a banana tree as well. But now imagine our surprise one year when we returned from vacation to find bananas on the tree. All right? And we couldn't believe it. It was too good to be true. In fact, we went out in the backyard. I kind of crept up on them, almost afraid I'd scare them away. And we finally got to the tree and reached out gingerly for the fruit. And what on earth? These aren't real bananas. They were plastic fruit. Plastic fruit that from like a dining room display, right? While we'd been out of town, a friend has come over in the backyard and played a little prank on us. See, that poor tree was never going to be fruitful. It's never going to be fruitful. The conditions were not right for it. All right? In fact, I don't really remember that tree ever growing more than about 5 feet tall, maybe not even 5 feet tall. And honestly, I have no idea what species of banana it even was, right? If it was just an ornamental or not. But it sure put on green leaves every year, new green leaves. And I suppose that word fruitful, right? The tree wasn't fruitful, but that word fruitful does have a lot of shades of meaning to it. Effective or productive, rich, fertile, abundant, prolific, all those sorts of things. But the plain sense is, of course, bearing fruit, which that plant did not, but did live and grow for many years. But good thing we weren't counting on it for food. Now, a certain kind of Lutheran exists, particularly someone of my grandparents' or parents' generation, who gets agitated when hearing about bearing fruit, being fruitful in everyday life. To them, it sounds like taking credit away from God and attempting that same old switcheroo that Adam and Eve did, becoming like God and justifying themselves. Now, of course, right, my grandparents and parents, well, then that leaves us with 4 generations since then who have no idea what a fruitful life is beyond what's sometimes called moralistic therapeutic deism. It goes like this, right? God watches over the world. He wants us to be nice to each other and fair, whatever that means. The goal of life is to feel good about yourself, self-actualization. God's only really needed to solve a problem. And good people, well, they go to heaven when they die, whatever a good person is. All right. Now, that worldview is certainly abundant. It's widespread, but it's not very productive. It's not very fertile for a God-pleasing life. And by the way, where did these 4 generations learn this false religion? Well, of course, it was taught to them by the previous 2 generations. Ouch. So what's needed for a fruitful life is not more hectoring for an ever more ethical or moral life. We have plenty of ethics. We have plenty of taboo behaviors. Plenty of scolds and school marms exist in the world. In fact, that's most of whatever we see on the evening news broadcast, whether you watch it on TV or you watch it on your phone, right? Just tisk-tisking and pearl clutching and the latest can you believe it outrage. But of course, the problem of sin and suffering in particular still remain in the world. Moralizing about being nice and fair doesn't solve suffering. In fact, it doesn't even lift a little finger to help. That's part of the problem. We think that suffering is a problem to be solved, optimized, improved, not just a basic feature of human life to be coped with. That's one reason we feel so angry in our culture nowadays, so impotent as well. We think that any suffering, from a hangnail to an incurable disease, from broken AC to ruined third world economies, to someone just looking at us funny on walking down the street. But those things are the opposite of a meaningful, fertile life. So the only solution left, can't get rid of suffering, but we can get rid of people who suffer. Now mind you, that doesn't let us off the hook for our own behavior, right? And excuses of, well, it doesn't hurt anybody, or consent, right? Those are not a proper ethical framework. And even attempting to talk people into a new worldview, a proper biblical one, right? That's not going to cut it either. We need a new way of being in the world, one that gives God proper credit for our abundant lives, materially, morally, spiritually, and one that is quantifiable and qualitative. Jesus is probably a good place to start if we're looking for such a thing. So we continue that same episode today, the one that has, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Abide. That's a great word in the Bible. St. John uses it more times than we can count. It means to live together with a vested interest in higher, richer things than just consumer goods and feeling good about ourselves. Abide in my love, says Jesus. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. Love one another as I have loved you. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I chose and appointed you to go and bear fruit. Now, it's easy to try to jump ahead, right? Begin legislating additional commands that, at least to us, seem necessary for keeping the command to love and bear fruit. And as Lutherans, right, that ought to make us feel pretty prickly, because that's not what Jesus says or does. But this is the thing those earlier generations of my parents and grandparents would get antsy about, was too much of this putting the cart before the horse. Right? If there's no love, if there's no abiding, if there's no vine, of course there's no fruit. It's kind of like this, right? I tried to grow a couple of avocado trees over the parsonage. I've had them for a couple of years, but they're pretty fussy, all right? And the last freeze killed them both dead. I didn't feel like replacing them after that. I was sick of it. But no one would go out there and try to tie an avocado onto a branch and then say, look, it's all better. The tree is being revived and restored. I mean, it's sort of the opposite of the banana story, right? But it's equally silly. And it's a joke in the worst kind of way. Let's back up to what Jesus said a few verses earlier. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. That's a pretty useful division of labor for a vine to have branches. The branches use that life and nourishment from the vine to bear fruit. It's efficient as well. I mean, just think about it again. You guys have gardens. Just how many tomatoes or grapes or dewberries, even apples and peaches, would we end up with if they all had to hang off of just that main little vine stem or trunk? Not many. Not many at all. Now, that doesn't make us existentially necessary to Jesus. He's God. He can do as he pleases, even raising up children from Abraham from the stones. However, it is amazingly dignified of him to incorporate us into his life. It's amazingly dignified that he gives us life like a vine gives to its branches. It's amazingly dignified that he gives us the role of bearing fruit for him and that he accepts it from us as our own. We're still a little stuck on how to move past his metaphor. We seem to think that abiding looks a lot like busy work at church, all the chores that make the place run, or church as a social community fixture, right? Cheers, where everybody knows your name. I recently listened to an interview with a man who grew up going to church, as we say. Right? He was an acolyte, took First Communion, all that stuff. But even as a boy, and growing with his family, right? He never thought anyone actually believed anything was going on at church beyond those few moralizing basics from earlier, right? It was just a charade to him. But recently, in the last few years, he's had a spiritual awakening, which he abruptly and suddenly realized that his fruitless upbringing had in fact been real, even though he couldn't see it, even though he had grown up cut off from the true vine. Think about that word abide a little more. Abiding is sharing life together. It's the opposite of consuming the same goods, services, products, and experiences. It's a known fact that when people are engaged in the same task toward the same desired outcome, that they begin to build friendships. Right? And the fact that so many of us today resist any friendship is a different pathology for a different sermon. But see, that's why kids, we just wrapped up Little League season out here, right? That's why kids in the same team, as well as co-workers, end up becoming friends after a while. It's true for me. The kids I played soccer with were my friends. We ended up playing basketball together and became friends even more. See, being together in that way, right? Same task, same desired outcome. When they do that, they begin to love and care for one another. And that love and care begins to produce actions and outcomes of friendship. Responsibility and accountability are certainly two words that come to mind. And it's not burdensome, as St. John writes. It just sort of happens, like the squash that will eventually show up on that vine in your garden. And those small victories of responsibility and accountability mutually, right? Those small victories of friendship, of care and concern, they go a long way to alleviate the suffering out in the world, to bear fruit for the sake of the world. In fact, indeed, like St. John writes, we can say that the world gets conquered. So for us as Christians, right, as those who are developing into fully devoted followers of Jesus, as we say around here, right, for those who are branches on the vine, the question shifts from what fruit or how much fruit do I have to produce? And it changes to how. How am I doing this? And the answer isn't found in trying harder or giving yourself more commandments to follow ever more religiously, hoping that eventually you'll achieve it. The answer actually is often piety and reverence, which are the opposites of expediency and efficiency. The opposite of prime and plus and pick up today. Piety and reverence, they don't unlock new rewards for you in the app. Just take two terribly simple ideas. Don't even think that they add up to much. Two simple ideas: bowing and making the sign of the cross. They don't alleviate anyone's suffering. They don't feed the hungry. They don't help little old ladies cross the street. I know it's much quicker and much more direct to zip past the altar up here, to zip into the church, into the nave without a bow. But really, that just exposes our own refusal to keep the first commandment, elevating efficiency way up above God. And then we wonder why church seems so empty when we refuse to see what's there, like that man in the interview I listened to. Again, I know it's much simpler to skip over making the sign of the cross in the creed and at communion. But it just exposes our lack of belief that this body will be resurrected because this body was resurrected. We wonder why we're so bored about hearing about Easter for 50 days, 49 days after the lilies and the eggs are gone. Why we're so ineffectual about getting others to obey the third commandment that we can barely give lip service to. That's not to mention things like those ancient catechism prayers or memorizing a few verses from the Bible and from hymns. Maybe, on the other hand, abiding with his reverence and piety, with his observance and performance, maybe it does make life better. Maybe it does conquer the world and its evil. See, those are the habits. Right? Piety, reverence, those things. Those are the habits, the behaviors that build and nourish trust and care and concern and the like, that blossom into love and friendship. Jesus says a friend gives of his own life for others because he loves them. Not the idea of them, but them personally. It's not burdensome, it's a joy. But I think of the many times that Solid Rock has given extremely reduced tuition in certain cases of hardship for families. Was it expensive on the bottom line? Did it hurt financially? Yeah, it did. Was it a burden? Were the families who were helped a burden? No. It was our joy. It was a joy to be able to help and conquer just a little bit more of the evil and suffering out in the world. Some of our little projects of busy work and chores in the congregation, those are not our fruit. And the same is true for the social community expectation of showing up to hear, "Good morning, how are you? I'm fine." Right? Those are the ways, those things become the ways by which we abide so that we learn to love. And then when we go out into the world, we conquer its many lacks and scarcities with an abundance of fruit. Love, service, patience, peace, kindness, generosity, and more. What goes on in here is sort of practice for the real stuff that happens as we go through everyday life in the world. In fact, so often it seems that ministry or the fruit of ministry, the good works, happen when we don't quite expect them. Big projects are nice. Food banks, affordable housing, even VBS and quilts. But they aren't necessarily the fruit that Jesus, that we are watching for. Often there are more ways that we abide on the vine, that we abide in God's love. Take VBS, right? We get a preview of VBS during education time this morning. The good works, the fruit, are not the things that make VBS happen. The decorations, the food, the teachers, the enjoyment of working together and whatnot. That's not the fruit. The fruit are what happens when people receive the love and the life. Those things come together to provide. When they encounter not craft paper or corn dogs or music videos, but Jesus. Jesus and his love and his life and his forgiveness. And if we don't have those things for ourselves, we can never bear fruit. Eventually we'll be cut off and thrown in the fire, just as Jesus says. But if we do have those things, then we conquer the world one fruitful branch at a time. We overcome the world's scarcity with fruit that endures. Amen.